Welcome to the Align Leader podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Walter C. Fluharty. Dr. Fluharty is currently Senior Vice President, Environmental Health and Safety for Simon Roofing and Sheet Metal Corporation, and is responsible for safety, health, environmental, and sustainability systems at their manufacturing facilities, 68 service centers, and large fleet. In a career that spans more than 35 years, Dr. Fluharty has built a reputation for developing world-class safety cultures within the manufacturing, refining, pharmaceutical, biotech, distribution, and construction industries. A frequent speaker at national and international EHS events, Dr. Fluharty holds an MS in Safety Management from Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, and a Doctor of Psychology from Southern California University for Professional Studies at Santa Ana, California. Welcome, Walt. Glad to have you on the podcast today.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you so much for hosting this and having me on today. Much appreciated. I hope we can share some information that'll be helpful to your listeners.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that you agreed to come on the podcast today. So this is going to be a great day.
Looking forward to our discussion.
Awesome. So, Walt, tell me a little bit about your career as an EHS professional. How did you get started, and what would you advise someone who wanted to get into environmental health and safety?
Well, no pun intended, Nick, but how I got started was actually by accident. Let me explain. When I was, very, very young, my first year in college at Marshall University, I dropped out the first semester to get married and move and went to work for a division of Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Wonderful opportunity for someone without the education at that point. And what I found was Goodyear offered a wonderful package for continuing education. And so I took advantage of that while working shift work and began attending Marshall University again, and did that for quite a number of years while working shift work and taking advantage of their tuition assistance, and was able to find myself working in their laboratory, still on shift work, still attending school, and made a move from Goodyear to a large chemical company, Axo, again in the same area. And they also provided a wonderful tuition assistance process and program, and was able to work myself up to the role of assistant chemist, working day shift now, and so it's easier to go to school. And Nick, as I was attending school and about to graduate, I found myself needing 1 hour to graduate. And I was planning on working on an MBA after graduation, but received a notice that Marshall University's safety program was offering 1 hour if you would attend their safety conference and write a paper. It was over a weekend, so it's like I needed it, and so I attended and found it really interesting. I mean, I'd already thought safety was critical in the chemical industry and in the laboratory, of course. And, I was always very aware and participated on safety committees. But attending this conference was eye-opening. And I wrote a paper on lockout, tagout of all things, and graduated. And not long after, yeah, thank you. Not long after graduation, I received a call from Dr. Treadway of Marshall University. He was heading up the program at that time and said, "We really enjoyed your paper on lockout tagout. How would you like to? We could waive the GRE and admit you. How would you like to attend?" And so that's how I, by accident, ended up in safety and studying safety. And it was a good fit. I've always cared about people, and I think that's so important if you're entering this field, is that you genuinely care about people. And you hear people talk about, well, we want you to go home in the same condition that you arrived in, but you know we really want people to go home in the same condition that they arrived, but also hopefully enriched in some way. And
Right.
so continued my work at AXO, and was promoted to chemist while working on my master's. And I was needing to come up with a graduate project. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember, Nick, but the buzzwords back in the late 80s, job enrichment. Does that ring a bell? Do you
Yes,
recall?
yes, that does
So,
ring a bell.
yep. So my project was enriching workers' jobs with safety, and got involved with helping the union safety committee, working, giving them some empowerment, and I worked to get them a budget, and things worked out really, really well. And I ended up after graduation actually going to work for the International Chemical Workers Union as their industrial hygienist.
Okay.
And things took off from there. I was a little apprehensive, Nick, as you might imagine, going to work for a labor union, but it was such a wonderful career move. It was opportunity to see so many different types of chemical facilities and meet different people and learn about different cultures and travel. So it was a great opportunity, but I also got to work in Washington, D.C., helping to develop and kind of recraft some of the regulations, specifically chemical accident prevention. And this is actually before the process of hazardous chemical standards. What is it?
Like to have
1910, 19. This was prior to that, but it was after Bhopal, after the Texas City
right.
explosion. And I was actually just started working with a grant, an Ocean New Directions grant, and put together a program for them. It was entitled "It Can Happen Here." And we put it together in a big red notebook, and it actually became known as the Red Book and was in all the OSHA offices for a number of years. Uh, but that took me back to Marshall.
Okay.
I used some of that grant money to bring in professors and interns from their program, and they traveled with me as we presented joint labor management training processes across the country, all to the chemical industry, all about chemical accident prevention. And so that was a really important piece and turning point in my career as working with a unionized, or working with a union and unionized companies. I had a call one day from Dr. Tom Kraus, one of the leaders and founders of behavioral based safety. And he was with and had founded Behavioral Science Technology in Ojai, California. And he said, well, Walt, we're having trouble implementing behavioral-based safety processes in unionized facilities. And my first question was, well, what's behavioral-based safety? I had no idea, not a clue. And so spent some time with them. And he sent his book to me, Behavioral-Based Safety Process, and enjoyed reading that. And one thing led to another, and off I went in that direction. Loved working with them. Again, eye-opening, learning about culture and cultural assessments and the consequences that none of us think about in the workplace that actually motivate and drive at-risk behavior. And how can we put new consequences in place that align, similar to your process, with the behaviors that we want to see in the workplace to keep people safe. And love that. Again, it was eye-opening, and that's what had me starting to thinking about I'd like to explore psychology a little bit deeper, and did not have time to do that with that organization because I was just traveling so very much. And so I went back into industry and started back into to grad school again, working on my doctorate. So, but you'd mentioned, what would I advise someone else to do if they're thinking about this career? Caring about people. You get into the safety field. It's not a field where, you can make a nice living, Nick. It's not a field you're going to get rich in by any shape or means, but it is so very satisfying when you feel like you've made a difference and you've impacted people's lives, you've helped keep them safe, and you've helped improve the workplace for them. And by doing so, you're helping improve the company that you're working with. So caring about people, I think, is the most important piece.
Yeah, there's so many things that you said. I worked in chemical manufacturing. I was on the manufacturing side of it, and I remember, sometimes there's a little bit of friction between, EHS and operations, because, we in operations, we want to get, we got to get the job done, right? Yes, get done as safely as possible. We need to take all those considerations in there. But I remember the company that I worked for, we were doing bulk chemical manufacturing, actually a pharmaceutical company. I remember, I was in the Army. We did inherently dangerous things all the time, but we did a lot of risk assessments to try to mitigate those risks. But I'm sorry, if you're going to jump out of an airplane, well, jumping out of an airplane is inherently risky. Sorry. If you're going to go blow stuff up, well, that's inherently risky. So when I ended up in a manufacturing plant as an operations leader, yes, we had safety was part of everything, but it didn't sink in until we did things like HAZWOPers, where we went through the entire process and said, okay, so what if this happens, or what if that happens? How are we going to mitigate that risk? And we tried to mitigate every possible scenario. Of course, it's impossible. I mean, I remember one of my operators got injured, not badly injured, but he had something off of one of our tanks, condensate, and it dripped into his eye. It affected his eye. Now he was wearing safety glasses, but it got in between his face and his glasses. And I remember, reviewing that with the union safety leader, and it was interesting. He was an Air Force guy that was a flight engineer on airplanes that I used to jump out of. And I remember him saying, well, we got to figure out how to mitigate this risk. And I'm like, if you're going to go blow stuff up, well, that's inherently risky. So it's impossible. This tank is outside. It's not covered. I mean, how much money do we want to spend to make sure that this never happens again? And I said, it's crazy. And I said, you were a flight chief on an airplane, right? So you would open the door and let us jump out of your airplane, right? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, why did you allow us to do that when you knew that was, inherently dangerous? And he goes, not the same thing. And I said, I got it. I'm with you. But I love the fact that, yes, if we would not have had EHS personnel there, we would have done things that was probably a little dangerous, or that was probably not the best way to do things. But everything worked out all right, so we don't need to worry about it. Well, that's not the right frame of mind to have, right? It shouldn't be, we got lucky and no one got hurt. It should be, hey, why are we doing stupid things, right? I'll take you. I was in Iraq in 2008. We were advising Iraqi units, and our power was all on generator. And I remember one night, my counterpart, an American counterpart, not an Iraqi counterpart, called me and said, hey, I need you to come out here and see what these guys are doing. And these Iraqis were on a ladder on a 10-ton fork truck with the forks raised as high as possible, the ladder on top of it, and then a guy at the very top of that ladder with a 2x4 trying to hit this switch. And I was like, we need to tell them to stop. And if they won't stop, we need to walk away because someone's going to get killed here. Right now, fortunately, nothing bad happened. But, I was like, I went to the senior Iraqi guy, and they said, hey, look, this is a bad idea. I'm just telling you, it's a bad idea. You need to get that guy down. I mean, he's, playing with electricity 100 feet in the air. That ladder could slide off those forks. The forks could, the hydraulics could go out and the forks drop, suddenly, all kinds of bad things could happen. And then I started thinking back, and it's like, we would never, ever allow an American to do something like that. Now, I know there was a time that, yes, we would allow that, but it's because of people like you, because of EHS professionals that say, hey, look, we don't need to do this. We don't, nobody needs to leave work injured for any reason. Yes, accidents do happen, unfortunately, but we need to prevent anything possible from happening because, I don't want to be calling somebody's wife saying, hey, your husband got injured because we did something stupid.
Exactly.
So there were so many things that you said that, brought me back to my manufacturing days. And it's just like, wow, I got a jolt there,
And thank you for bringing up a few items. The one thing that you mentioned that really hit home was they were taking risks and nothing bad happened. I mean, think about that. And, when I'm speaking to groups, one of the examples I use is talking about a manager who just had such a great record of getting jobs done completely and on time and under budget. And when you start looking at what's going on, wonderful manager would never, ever, ever want anyone to get hurt on the job.
Right.
But he'd go to a job site and look around and say, okay, guys, we're last day. We need to get this done by evening, and look at his watch and say, okay, go at it, and then leave. We'll come back at the end of the day and everything's done. But what he didn't know was while he was off site, risks were being taken. The ladders weren't being tied off, the fall protection not being worn, the PPE not being worn, just over in a corner, but nothing bad happened.
Right.
And in the minds of, and he just we came back and said, great job. Let's go for pizza. And without knowing it, just reinforced it. It's okay to take these risks.
Yep.
And then in the minds of the workers, well, nothing bad happened. It didn't happen to me. So I can continue to do these risks. And, not only did no one get hurt, we had pizza
Yeah. Got
and
rewarded. We
yeah,
got
we were
rewarded for our
rewarded. And
dangerous
so,
behavior. Yeah.
yep. And so those things continue in the culture. And so where we want to get, you'd mentioned also about, having an EHS person, a safety person on a job site, absolutely critical. Where we want to get is move the culture to the point that the EHS person no longer needs to be
Right.
there,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we want people to feel empowered to, as you said earlier, stop and say, hey, we need to fix this. We can't do this. We need to stop this action, and also understand, have the training and the skills to do it, and understand what is safe, but feel empowered to do the safe thing, and build in what I like to call habit strength. So, we're working with an employee, and rather than beating an employee up for taking an at-risk behavior, of course, we're going to stop it if there's imminent risk,
Right.
but say, I really appreciate you trying to get this job done quickly, Nick, but I'm concerned that you might get hurt. How can we do this differently? And so get them involved in the discussion about working safely, and then agreeing on, this is what we're going to do forward. And at that point, it might be uncomfortable for them to do it because they have done it the other way for a long period of time, maybe even years, with
Right.
nothing bad happening.
Yeah.
And then we want to reinforce it, because once we reinforce a behavior and somebody is doing a behavior over and over again, the way we're designed, our attitudes affect behavior. People will ask, well, if I have a good, safe attitude, aren't I going to work safely? Well, you would think so, but it goes back to our discussion before. They take the risk, nothing bad happens. So their attitude is, I'm not going to get hurt. But if we start changing the behavior, we can also affect the attitude. So that's something that people really don't understand. And that's what the science of applied behavioral analysis is all about, is changing the behavior first. Because once we get someone to do the behavior over and over again, there's actually chemical changes in the brain that changes the attitude. And then if we get people doing that behavior, it becomes habit strength. The safety person doesn't need to be there. We're changing the culture one person at a time.
Right. It's almost, in the Army, we had, we call it, back then it was nuclear, biological, chemical training. We had a gas mask, and we always had our gas mask with us, but we rarely did a whole lot of NBC training. And that's kind of the same attitude in some companies about safety. It's like, yeah, we do safety. When we do safety, we do safety training over here, but then we have to get back to work and
Yeah.
get it done.
Yeah.
And instead, safety should be ingrained.
Exactly right.
Same with environmental. When I worked in the chemical manufacturing, we had an incinerator, and it was very easy to have a environmental problem, either a spill or a release, and that was a catastrophic event. I mean, we were very serious about the environment as well, but it was always like, well, there's operations, and then there's, we have to go. Oh, it's time to go do our safety briefing, right? When instead it needs to be ingrained. That needs to be part of the operation.
Absolutely.
Safety needs to be part of the operation all the time. Environmental considerations need to be part of the equation all the time, and it can't be a matter of, in some cases we have 55-gallon drums full of hazardous chemicals, and we're trying to maneuver these things around, and because we're taking shortcuts. And when we allow someone to take a shortcut, then they take another shortcut, and then they take another shortcut, and it never ends. And then eventually something bad happens. right?
You understand it well, Nick.
Yeah, or we got lucky, no one got hurt, and
Yeah.
it's like that's not the that's not necessarily the right attitude, because like I said, I'm grateful that my time working in chemical manufacturing, nothing. I never got in a situation where, but it was pointed out to me several times where I'd have an operator dressed out, and I walk in not dressed out, and he's like, "Well, why am I dressed out and you're not?"
If you're not,
Well,
right.
well, my exposure level is 5 minutes. Your exposure level is 45 minutes. But that was not the right answer. The right answer is yes, I need to leave and get dressed out, even if I'm only going to be here for
Yeah.
5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Because that's also what a good leader does. So not just a safety person, but a good leader. And then I worked for a company where safety was not all that important, because there were quite a few people missing fingers. And I was like, well, why are we allowing people to operate this way? And the answer was, well, they know better. Well, they may know better, but they're not practicing. Why are we not forcing them to practice? Why are we not making safety that important? Because I don't want somebody to go home missing a finger or missing a couple of fingers, or next thing you know, he's going to be missing a hand and then an arm. It's like, no, that's just. I want to jump. I want to jump to greatest accomplishment. Tell me a little bit about.
Well, I think what I'm most proud of, Nick, is when I was in grad school, I developed and actually trademarked a process that I call CARE. And CARE is a little bit different spelling. The acronym has two A's. So it is a meshing of a management tool and applied behavioral analysis that we talked about earlier. I put them together. So let's go through CARE real quickly. So C, clarifying the objectives at a very high level for an organization. And typically what I've used it for in my career has been safety, of course, but I've also used it for performance improvement, for project management, for environmental, and I'm working on a sustainability process now for Simon Roofing. So it applies, but getting a high level clarification of those objectives. And then we come back to applied behavioral analysis, and I'm playing on your background there, alignment. So, well, let me back up. The first A is actually assessment. I love looking at your alignment sign there, but assessment, so applied behavioral analysis, assessing the culture of the organization, looking at what about that culture can we leverage and build upon to help achieve those objectives? Or conversely, Nick, what about that culture would be barriers to achievement of the objectives? Now we'll go to the second A in alignment. So we know what the objectives are. We know where our strengths are. Let's develop smart behavioral based goals for the divisions, the departments, and the individuals so that everybody is aligned. We're all working towards those objectives. So, a management tool. Then, coming back to something we talked about earlier, how do we reinforce those behaviors? How do we make sure that those behaviors that are going to help us be successful are become habit strength, and that helps us assure attainment of our objectives? And then finally, the E in CARE, evaluation. We typically think of that as being a management tool, and it is. So what are the metrics? How do we define the metrics and work on appropriate scorecards? But here's something that people often don't think about, Nick, is if you do metrics well and communicate metrics well, they become antecedents or triggers to behavior. So not only are we closing the loop with those metrics of what's working well and how do we continue, how do we stay on track and help us evaluate, it's also how do we use those metrics to drive and continue and spur the performance, the behaviors that we want. So that's the process, and I've used it. Oh goodness, throughout my career, I've taken it with me. The first place I used it was where I actually completed my doctorate when I was with Shell, and I was responsible for two refineries in California, one in Southern California, one for Northern California, and Northern California. And the way I introduce care is through experiential learning, um, because when we're experiencing something, it helps retention. But what I found, if we're experiencing while having fun, it really opens up those dopamine channels and you retain much, much more and much more effective and long term. So I've taken people for experiential learnings to Washell to a NASCAR event, and we spend the morning talking about care and how we're going to what are our objectives for driving. Of course, being safe is one of those, because we're all going to drive at high speeds on this track. What skills do we need? So how are we going to assess then next our skills as a team? What do we want to look at that we can build on? How are we going to look after each other and align our skills together? And while we're on the track and we're communicating, how do we reinforce each other to make sure that we're reaching our objectives and staying safe? And then at the end of the event, what metrics are we going to use to determine are we successful or not? So I have to say that may have been the most fun day ever at work, because after we finished driving, they had this beautiful buffet set for us in the infield. But after lunch, we went back into the conference room and it's like, let's debrief. Let's talk about what we learned. How did this work? How did this improve your driving? And how did it affect driving? And then finally, how do we take this back to the refineries?
Right.
How do we use the care process to improve the safety of our employees? And then we started going through the list and developing objectives for the refineries, and let's look at assessing the culture of your various departments, and how do we go about that? What are the right goals that we want to align everybody to those objectives? How do we reinforce it? And what are the metrics that we're going to be looking at? Not just lagging indicators, did we have somebody injured, but how do we tell if we're being proactive,
right,
and the things that we do that will prevent injuries? And so safety with them, also did some performance improvement with them, took it to Roche Pharmaceuticals, and we did an experiential learning at a animal rehab facility, similar to what we talked about, but focusing on not only safety, but some processes for sterilization and keeping injectables that sterile during the processing. And most recently at Simon Roofing, I've used the care process for mostly safety, but we're also developing a sustainability process that's now in its third year.
Okay.
And as far as I know, we are the only commercial roofer with a viable written sustainability process. And we've been able to cut down our use of solvents by 80%. We've reduced waste. So, the process has worked for sustainability for us, just like it had had for safety, which I'll share with you in a little bit.
Wow, that's impressive. And I mean, I love the experiential learning. Going to a NASCAR event, going to an animal rehab facility. I mean, I agree with you. If you make learning fun, people are going to tend to learn better. And the process, the care process sounds, like something that we should all be using. It's the it's the right approach to getting a lot of process optimization done.
Well, I'm really proud of it. How I introduced it to Simon Roofing was when I interviewed with Simon Roofing, and I'm sure you've seen processes where you go through many types of panel interviews. I had gone through 5 panel interviews over a period of
Oh,
days.
wow.
And my final interview was with the chairman of the board, namesake Simon, Alex Simon, and Simon Roofing's family owned. They've been around for 125 years, and I was starting to feel like family after all those interviews. But I sat across the table from Alex, and he looked at me. He said, "Well, Walt, tell me why you're right for to lead safety, environmental health and safety for Simon Roofing." And I moved up and I said, "Well, Alex, I'm cheap, I'm lazy, and I like to have fun." And his eyes got about this big, and you could tell he's wondering, well, how did this guy get to me?
How do you get this far in the process?
And um, so then I took the conversation in a different direction. Said, well, I've been interviewing a lot, and I understand that where you want to take the company is growth by, having a total recordable incident rate of less than 2, so that larger companies want to do business with us and we can grow the business. And for those of not familiar with total recordable incident rate, very, very quickly, it's a measurement of how many injuries that you have that are what we call OSHA recordable. And an OSHA recordable injury is one that needs more than just first aid. It takes medical treatment. And so those need to go on an OSHA log, and then the rate is the number of injuries for every 100 employees. So large national companies look at contractors who have a lower rate, and typically they look for a rate of 2 or less. And so I said, I'm cheap in that, when I look at what we're doing, everything's kind of reactive. Let's invest in safety, and let's get proactive about safety and look at what can we do to keep injuries from happening so that we can reach this goal.
Right.
And then I said, well, I'm lazy, just ask my wife. I can't do this alone. Everybody, we're going to work on getting every single person involved in caring about their safety and the safety of their coworkers. And we're going to build a culture where that becomes the norm. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And then finally, I asked him, well, when's the last time you talked about safety? And it was fun. And he said, well, never. And I said, well, we're going to make it fun. So when I introduced care, we did a cooking class for some of the leaders. We did a ceramics class. And again, making it fun. And then we've tried to make it fun with all of the training processes that we do with our employees and when we get them involved. So it's been a wonderful journey.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And again, I love the thinking out of the box ideas on, how do you take a subject that might not be super exciting and make it exciting? make it fun. I'd love to go work for a company that, hey, we're going to do a cooking class. We're not a food manufacturer. We're not a restaurant, but we're going to teach you how to cook. That's really cool. That's really cool.
And again, it really does help with retention.
Yeah, well, that I could see that as well. I mean, people like working. I mean, considering how much time you spend at work, why not make work fun?
Yeah,
Why not make the
exactly.
people,
Yeah,
this is your work family. Got it. It's not your real family, but if everybody can care for each other and if we can make it enjoyable, then people are going to want to do more. They're going to give more into the company rather than, well, it's time to go. I know that we don't punch cards anymore. That's how long ago I was in manufacturing. But I remember working for a company that it was a good company, but they didn't really care for their people much, and that bothered me tremendously. But I remember some operators telling me, yeah, when I walk in the door and I punch the clock, I also turn my brain off. And I'm like, why would you do that? And there's like,
yeah,
because nobody here wants to hear what I have to say.
yeah,
And it's like, oh my God, that's so depressing, right?
yeah.
And I tried, I always sought, I worked in operations. I also worked in the engineering department, and I always sought operator, input. It's like, hey, we're going to do this. How's that? Do you have any ideas around that? And they're like, yeah, I've been waiting for somebody to ask me that question for 10 years.
I bet.
What do we need to do? And it's like,
Yeah,
why didn't you tell somebody that before? And he would say, because nobody wanted to listen to me. Nobody cared. Right. And it's like, wow, that's just depressing.
and that's a really important piece to find out about an organization's culture of, what are the needs of the people. And, going back to the experiential events, when you do those type of events, they're also team building.
Right.
It's a
Yeah,
great way to build your team.
absolutely.
With I do something at those events. I know you've heard of the DISC analysis where you're
Yes.
looking at personality traits. Well, somebody does a DISC analysis and then you forget it 3 days later.
Right.
I like to do something that I've called the personality zoo, where I show some slides of different animals and what are the personalities. What are the personalities of the lion and the deer and the rabbit, and then have the folks in the group, well, what personality am I? And have them draw their animal. And I've even allowed them to put two animals together. But, the point of it becomes, how does the lion interact with the rabbit and how do they work together? And then you let those two people interact and say, well, this is what I need. Getting back to what you were saying, I need to be heard and I need to be listened to. And it's something that, again, doing it that way, people retain it and they're more likely to continue with it, as long as, and I know I've used this word several times, as long as the leaders are reinforcing
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to shift over real quickly to talk about Simon Roofing. It's something I found on your website that just made my heart flutter, and that is innovation. I'm reading directly from your website.
Okay.
Create something new. We're always in the forefront of science when it comes to commercial roofing products and processes. We maintain an in-house laboratory for research, development, and product testing, and have partnered with Youngstown State University STEM program for additional research capacity. And I just love the idea of, hey, we don't have all the answers, and maybe we can't make a new mousetrap, but we can always seek to be innovative. I mean, I think when companies, you think of roofing companies and it's like, well, how much has technology changed in 125 years? Probably a lot, right? I'm not a roofing guy, but probably a lot. But still, it's like we're doing roofing solutions. And I know Simon is all commercial, industrial, large
Correct.
large type of roofing. But I love also the fact that, hey, we're not just sitting back on our laurels and say, well, this is the way we've been doing roofing for the last 20 years. It's, hey, we're always trying to do something new, which also leads to, one of the areas that I recruit in is AEC, architecture, engineering, construction, manufacturing, defense, and it's mostly in the engineering arena. Although I also do trades, but the idea around STEM is to me always critical. As a mechanical engineer, when I came into the field, there were a million mechanical engineers, and it seems like today that more engineers are leaving the market than are coming into the market, and I'm seeing that now as a recruiter. I didn't see that 5 years ago, but now I'm starting to see that where it's starting to become a critical node for American engineers. I can find engineers from all over the world very easily. I mean, I live close to Virginia Tech. I interact with the engineering department quite a bit there through some community organizations, and almost all of them are foreigners. They're not Americans. And even with some of my clients, I'm recruiting occasionally. I recruit younger engineers, and I can find 1,000 Indian mechanical engineers with master's degrees, but I can rarely find an American mechanical engineer with a master's degree. It's interesting. So I want to ask a little bit about, how that affects Simon Roofing with your engineers, with your technology, with your tradespeople. How is that? Is that something that is a concern, or how is Simon Roofing staying ahead of that curve, the talent drain curve, if you will?
Well, I think we're really fortunate to be in Youngstown and being so close to Youngstown University. We have such a great relationship with them, Nick. Our research and development team, we have a large research and development team that works out of our plant in Struthers, Ohio, which is, just a suburb of Youngstown. And with Youngstown University, we bring in their students as from engineering students and chemistry students come in and intern in our research department that's headed by someone who has a PhD in chemistry. And we're always looking to be innovative, finding better ways to not only manufacture, but better ways of, being more sustainable in our products that are more sustainable, and within our chemistry, products that last longer, that are more protective, don't degrade. And research is just so important, and those skills, as you mentioned, you need to bring those skills in. And again, we're so fortunate to be near the university, and we also recruit and bring in from their construction management process for our field personnel. So, we do really well at bringing in folks from, engineering and the sciences, the STEM groups. Probably the biggest challenge we have is recruiting field personnel as roofers, and bringing into the trades. And I think we're seeing more and more emphasis around the country of how important the trades are. But that's probably our biggest challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of construction companies, and they're they, as a matter of fact, they're the ones that brought this up to the forefront for me. That STEM's important, but trades are important as well. And just as there's a deficit in STEM, there's a deficit in skilled tradespeople, because let's face it, not all of us can be TikTok influencers.
Yeah.
Some of us need to be roofers and millwrights and electricians, etc. And and those are very profitable fields as well.
They really are. And, I think some of the things that at least I'm witnessing as being able to recruit and retain um, the tradespeople are assuring them that they're going to be safe, letting them
Yeah,
know that they are part of the safety process and that they have uh, a right to a safe and healthy workplace. And with rights come responsibilities. Part of those responsibilities are to say stop if something is at risk, if they feel they're going to be hurt or someone else is going to be hurt, or if we're going to damage the environment, and not have any repercussions for doing
right,
that. I mean, in
right.
fact, our CEO has written handwritten thank you notes to people
Oh, wow, that
for,
is cool.
for
Yeah,
stopping jobs.
that's cool.
And the other part, this, as you can imagine, roofing's hard work, labor intensive.
Yeah,
And so we've developed a process of work hardening. So when newer employees come in, they don't have roofing experience. It takes time to build up to do this type of work. And, a lot of the work is done in you know, the hot weather or sometimes in extreme cold.
right,
And so we make sure that uh, people, our work hardening process is they work a period of time and then they take a 15-minute break, every hour as they're coming in. And while they're doing that, we'll give them, safety items, the safety training to study on a tablet, and gives them time to relax. So they're doing that. And regroup it, and it gives them, we do that for a month, and it gives them time to acclimate to the task and build up to the task that we're asking them to do. And that builds retention as well. It's like,
right,
one, it shows, hey, we care about you. You're not just here
right,
to do this. We want you here to build a career and be able to grow and support your family and again, not only go home safe at the end of the day, but hopefully enriched.
right. Yeah, I love that idea. That it's more than just going home safely. Go home enriched. You get something out of what you do every day. And I love the fact that safety is part of everything we do. That's got to be, that's like I said. The contrast between the two manufacturers I worked for. One, safety was extremely important. We went out of our way to ensure safety, and anybody in that plant could stop any operation because they didn't feel it was safe. Anybody. Going to the other side, it was like, yes, yeah, safety is important. Check the block, but it, it the emphasis was not quite as high, and I was shocked because I came from a very safety conscious manufacturer, and I went to someone that wasn't as safety conscious, and I was like, and I remember telling people, look, if you see something that's unsafe, stop them. We had large trucks running around indoors in our facility because we were a paper manufacturer. So these large clamp trucks with a 5-ton roll of paper running around, and sometimes hey, I can't see around the clamp truck, and then we're going to run over somebody, or
Mm-hmm.
but that safety culture was not ingrained. It was there, it was on our board. It's like, hey, safe environment, but it was not ingrained into everything that we did. And so I love the fact that Simon Roofing takes that seriously. That's a that's as important as doing your actual operation. That's to me that's the way it should be. Not
And I agree. And once it becomes ingrained and it becomes a part of what you do, it it's safety. A lot of people look, Nick, at safety as a cost,
right.
but it's actually an investment.
Yeah.
And when you do it right, we've been able to grow our business because of our safety performance. We're recognized as a leader in the industry.
Wow.
And, we have large national customers now that choose us because of our commitment to safety.
That's cool.
And, some of the names of the customers I won't share, but they call us for safety advice.
Oh, wow.
What do you
Yeah.
think of this?
Yeah.
And now it's becoming that way with our commitment to the environment and sustainability. I'll be speaking in Denver this coming March at a sustainability conference for the third year. And we're, again, as I mentioned earlier, as far as I know, we're the only commercial roofing company with a viable sustainability process.
Wow. Wow. That's that again, that makes my heart flutter. I love hearing about companies that are leading the way, companies that are, want to do things the right way, not because there's profit involved, but because it's the right thing to do. And sure, the profits will follow, but that's not the leading point. The leading point is, hey, let's do things the right way because it is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, Walter, what are your final thoughts that you would like to leave our audience with?
Well, to summarize some of the things we talked about is for safety to work or for any process within an organization to work, you need to have the employees engaged and involved, and you do that through a process of asking them questions and letting them be part of the solution rather than just blaming them for the problem, and getting everybody involved. Don't forget to make it fun. And for anybody considering a career in safety, environmental health and safety, it's a noble career. You go home at the end of the day, most days, feeling really good about the way the day went, and that you really made a difference. And there's a lot of opportunity out there in the field, Nick. I mean, there's you as a recruiter, I'm sure that you're probably looking for environmental health and safety professionals for your clients frequently, and it seems to be a really growth profession right now. I would highly recommend it. It's been good for me. I've had a wonderful career. I've worked on 4 continents and in 49 states, and it's just been something that I would encourage if there's at all any interest.
Awesome. Well, Walt, it has been a pleasure chatting with you today. For those of you watching this podcast, I hope you received some great pearls of wisdom, and I hope you'll join me for my next podcast coming soon. Remember, aligned leaders are a superpower in great companies, strengthening the bonds of the company's strategic goals with a better informed and better led employee base. Walt, thank you very much. I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Nick. Thank you.